Robertson's love of music as a teenager introduced him to Canada's emerging rock and roll scene. He was already playing in local bands by the middle of his teens, and his technical prowess and innate compositional abilities impressed more seasoned musicians. When he joined Ronnie Hawkins and the Hawks, a band that played gritty rockabilly, it was his big break. Robertson's first exposure to the rigorous lifestyle of a professional musician came when touring North America with Hawkins. Along with honing his skills on stage, he started developing enduring relationships with his bandmates Rick Danko, Levin Helm, Richard Manuel, and G. Hudson. When the Hawks finally split from Hawkins to become their own group, later referred to as just a band, these connections would prove crucial. One of the most significant moments in rock history was the band's ascent to stardom in the late 1960s. Robertson served as the group's lead guitarist and primary songwriter, redefining the sound of rock music. The world had never heard anything like their 1968 debut album, Music from Big Pink, which was recorded in a home in upstate New York. With roots in Americana, folk, country, and blues, it eschewed the psychedelic fads of the day and instead brought in a rustic, earthy sound that served as an inspiration to innumerable musicians. Songs like Chest Fever and The Weight were hailed for their poetic depth and timeless appeal, and they quickly became hits. Robertson wrote songs that encapsulated American life and served as the inspiration for a large portion of the band's repertoire. Even though he is Canadian, his songs captured the essence of the human experience, the hardships of the working class, and the rural South. Some of the most memorable and timeless songs in popular music are still The Night They Drove, Old Dixie Down, Up on Creek, and It Makes No Difference. His delicate yet effective guitar playing enhanced each song's narrative rather than trying to overpower it. In addition to writing songs, Robertson played a key role in determining the band's direction and appearance. He frequently served as the group's spokesperson, helping them navigate the demands of the music business and the turbulence of celebrity. Their fame was further solidified by the band's partnership with Bob Dylan during Dylan's contentious, electrified tours in 1965, 1966. Robertson and the band demonstrated their tenacity and dedication to artistic integrity by standing firmly behind Dylan as he endured taunts from crowds that opposed his switch from folk to rock. The band's renowned farewell performance, The Last Waltz, at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco on Thanksgiving Day, 1976, was the pinnacle of their career. Dylan, Joni Mitchell, Neil Young, Eric Clapton, Van Morrison, and other rock and folk icons came together for the event, which was mostly planned under Robertson's direction and directed by Martin Scorsese. The resulting movie, also called The Last Waltz, is now regarded as one of the best concert documentaries ever produced, preserving Robertson's idea that music is a historical narrative as well as a shared experience. Following the band, Robertson had a lucrative solo career, putting out a number of albums that demonstrated his developing creative style. Robertson's ability to adjust to various musical genres was demonstrated by his self-titled debut solo album from 1987, which combined rock and ambient production and included collaborations with Peter Gabriel and U2. His subsequent albums, such as Contact from the Underworld of Red Boy 1998, featured native voices, chants, and themes that connected traditional culture with modern sounds, further reflecting his indigenous ancestry. Along with his music, Robertson developed a lengthy and successful partnership with director Martin Scorsese, contributing to or scoring a number of soundtracks, such as Raging Bull, Casino, The King of Comedy, Gangs of New York, The Wolf of Wall Street, and The Irishman. He became one of the most admired characters in film music because of his keen sense of how music may improve on screen. Narrative. In his memoirs, particularly Testimony 2016, Robertson has discussed his experiences with music, celebrity, and cultural exploration. Warmth, humor, and candor abound in the book, which offered fans a close-up view of the man behind the songs, from his early influences to the intricate band dynamics and his ongoing artistic endeavors. Robertson married Canadian journalist Dominique Bourgeois on March 24, 1968, marking a significant turning point in his personal life. Being the daughter of a professor and film critic, Dominique had been raised in a setting that was strongly influenced by culture, the arts, and intellectual endeavors. Robertson, who at the time was becoming well known throughout the world as the band's main guitarist and chief composer, experienced stability after this marriage, as they managed the strains of a grueling touring schedule, the expectations of celebrity, and the artistic lifestyle that frequently caused relationship strife. Robbie and Dominique emerged as one of the more admired couples of the late 1960s and early 1970s. Robbie's life was grounded during years that could have easily been engulfed by the frenzy of the rock and roll scene, thanks to Dominique, who gave a sense of balance and intellectual company with her own journalism profession. Notwithstanding their close relationship, there were still difficulties in the marriage. Dominique filed for divorce in 1977, when their relationship was tense and unclear. Around this same period, Robbie was making the momentous choice to cease the band's touring career, which would culminate in the iconic concert movie, The Last Waltz. Their challenges were exacerbated by the pressure of Robertson's artistic obligations, the music industry's way of life, and the inherent strains of raising a family in the spotlight. Dominique started a divorce, but it was never completed. Following a brief breakup, the couple managed to get back together and continued to be legally married for many more years. In the end, Robertson and Bourgeois' marriage lasted until 2003, which is evidence of how strong their bond was despite the challenges life threw at them. Robertson's identity outside of music was shaped by the family he and Dominique raised together. They had 3 kids, a son named Sebastian and 2 daughters. Robertson frequently talked about how much his kids meant to him, and how parenting offered him a viewpoint that came from not being famous. His son Sebastian, in particular, continued the family's artistic ties by pursuing his own artistic endeavors. Even if it was occasionally private, Robbie's family was a big part of his world, guiding his choices and keeping him grounded. While he traveled the world and worked with some of the greatest musicians in history, although it would take many years for Robertson to formally remarry, he eventually fell in love again after splitting from Dominique. Just a few months prior to his death, on March 12, 2023, Robertson wed Janet Zuccarini, a Canadian restaurant tour operator and businesswoman who was well known in her industry. In addition to her success in the restaurant industry, Janet was well known to Canadian viewers for her work as a Top Chef Canada judge. She contributed her own reputation for originality, foresight, and tenacity, qualities that seemed to strike a deep chord with Robertson, who had dedicated his life to inventing new musical genres. Their later life marriage demonstrated Robbie's continued ability for love as well as his willingness to form deep connections despite his deteriorating health. Of all the friendships and conflicts Robbie Robertson formed throughout the course of his remarkable career, few were as tense as his relationship with Paul McCartney. Despite spending a large portion of his life working with music icons like Bob Dylan and Eric Clapton, Robertson had a complex relationship with McCartney that was frequently characterized by scathing criticism and even animosity. The way Robertson, who was often respectful to his peers, seemed to save some of his sharpest words and most intense annoyances for McCartney was what made this interaction so intriguing. Growing up in Toronto before entering the American music scene, Robertson was one of the Beatles' biggest fans in the 1960s. However, as he frequently disclosed in interviews and private discussions, he believed that Paul McCartney was the group member that annoyed him the most. Robertson once said, "Paul always struck me as someone who had to be the center of attention no matter what," characterizing him as extremely refined and unrelentingly domineering. Robertson, who took great satisfaction in his music's genuineness and rawness, found McCartney's meticulously manicured persona and melodic pop sensibilities to be nearly manufactured. When Robertson joined Bob Dylan's inner circle, this antipathy grew. Robertson was well aware of the comparisons being made between Dylan's unpolished talent and McCartney's more commercial appeal. As the band had gained notoriety as Dylan's backing group during his contentious electric tours, Robertson claimed that Paul was constantly attempting to be cautious. Dylan put everything on the line. Paul wanted everything neat and orderly, yet he risked everything. According to Robertson, McCartney represented the same commercial aspect of music that the group aimed to avoid. Robertson's animosity was further fueled by McCartney's controlling demeanor during teamwork. When Robertson and McCartney did cross paths, especially at celebrity-filled events in the 1970s and 1980s, Robertson remembered feeling ignored by him. He spoke as though there were no other people in the room. Robertson lodged a grievance. He had a tendency to make any talk about the Beatles or himself into a story. Many musicians looked up to McCartney, but Robertson resented what he saw as his conceit. Remarkably, Robertson never showed the other Beatles the same level of hostility. He frequently spoke kindly of George Harrison, whom he saw as musically daring and spiritually rooted. He even respected John Lennon for his raw candor. Robertson also thought Ringo Starr was friendly and grounded. However, Paul McCartney was the one person I couldn't stand for the reasons Robertson repeatedly emphasized. It was a stark contrast. Robertson was able to connect with nearly everyone in the field. However, there was no reconciliation with McCartney. Later in life, their paths kept crossing, frequently at business gatherings or through mutual friends like Clapton. Although Robertson's public remarks had softened by the 1980s when both men were well established as legendary figures in their own right, the old contempt still persisted. In an honest interview, Robertson stated, "I respect what he accomplished. Sure. However, admiring someone and appreciating their accomplishments are two entirely different things." Robertson's comparison of McCartney to Dylan, whom he regarded as his ideal musical collaborator, is maybe the most telling. Dylan, in Robertson's opinion, embodied the bold, unyielding artist who dared to alienate listeners in the name of truth. He perceived McCartney, on the other hand, as the quintessential crowd pleaser who cared more about reaching the top of the charts than breaking new ground. According to Robertson, "I've always been about the grit, the imperfections that make music real." He desired the shine. Paul Robertson's affections for McCartney remained firm even in his older years. He was able to recognize McCartney's gift for melody and his influence on popular music, but their personal conflict continued to be a defining feature of their relationship. In fact, Robertson didn't hesitate to answer the question of which well-known musician he found it most difficult to get along with in his later years. Paul at all times. Something about him just didn't sit well with me. Perhaps I'm to blame. It might be his. However, he was the person I detested the most out of everyone I've ever met. Although unusual for Robertson, who generally encouraged peace and teamwork, this persistent animosity provided a fascinating look into the nuanced personalities that underlie the greatest rock and roll icons. It demonstrated how conflicts between ego, philosophy, and temperament could create wounds that would never completely heal, even among the most well-known musicians. Robbie Robertson, the band's founding member and renowned guitarist and songwriter, died on August 9, 2023. At the age of 80, his life and career were extraordinary and had a significant impact on the development of contemporary music. He passed away in Los Angeles, California, where he had been residing and getting treatment for the last phases of his illness. Reports claimed that Robertson fought a valiant year-long battle with prostate cancer, one that he approached with calm strength and dignity, just as he had done throughout his life. His inventiveness and enthusiasm persisted despite his deteriorating health. According to people close to him, he frequently discussed unfinished musical ideas and the value of using song to tell stories, which had been the hallmark of his career for more than 60 years.